our final panel, we have two guests, and our final topic is being proactive, choosing to lead. Across Canada and in Alberta, there have been moves from provincial governments to reorganize local government structures with mixed results. This panel will discuss the results of a top-down approach to regionalization and whether there might be benefits to a more proactive grassroots approach. Eileen Clarke, Mayor, Town of Gladstone in Manitoba. We heard of Manitoba earlier in the day. Eileen, born and raised in Gladstone, elected Mayor of the town for the first time in November of 2006. In September of 2013, the Manitoba government passed the Municipal Modernization Act, mandating that all municipalities under 1,000 in population amalgamate to meet that minimum threshold. Although Eileen opposed the amalgamation requirement for her town, by early 2014 it was formally amalgamated with the rural municipalities of Lakeview and Westbourne to form the municipality of Westlake Gladstone. She is now running for mayor of the new municipality. As well, another gentleman who I've had the pleasure of interviewing on Alberta Primetime many times before, David King, past executive director, Alberta School Boards Association. David has a lifelong interest in local government and its relationship with the provincial government, and an interesting perspective. He was executive director of the Public School Boards Association of Alberta at the time of the forced amalgamation of school boards across the province in 1994. The association subsequently challenged the forced amalgamation all the way to the Supreme Court. Prior to that, he served for 15 years as a member of the Legislative Assembly of Alberta. He was Minister of Education for 7 years, during which time the provincial government undertook major initiatives impacting local government, including regional planning commissions, major land assemblies, the establishment of transportation and utility corridors, changes to power and pipeline assessment, and the machinery and equipment tax regime, and significant urban annexations. They both have some very interesting perspectives. Eileen, how about you take us away?
Thanks very much, and thanks so much to Bill Given for inviting me here. It's been a real education for me, and I am so jealous of you doing things right. It's amazing. Just a couple of notes before I get started. I'm going to refer to AMM a lot. That's the Association of Manitoba Municipalities, and I am the vice president of our association. The other thing is, I'll tell you right now, we have a good working relationship, our association, with our government. So you may get other indications throughout here, but we actually have a really good working relationship. My presentation is going to be kind of like reality TV in regards to amalgamation done badly. So it is totally different, and like I said, I applaud you for doing it right. So I'm going to start out with the announcement. The municipalities of Manitoba received the announcement at our November 2012 annual convention from the Minister of Local Government, and I will refer to Minister of Local Government, and then I'm going to talk about municipal government. There was some changes midterm here. So his government had announced in the throne speech that all municipalities under the threshold of 1,000 residents would have to amalgamate as of the scheduled 2014 municipal election, and this process was going to start immediately. Our president of our association had received a phone call just the night before from the minister just to notify that this announcement was coming the next day. If we had been consulted earlier, as we would expect to be, because that's normally how these types of things would be handled, we would have brought forward to the minister and to the premier the countless complications that would be encountered without working through the process prior to implementing it. The minister was very clear in his announcement to our members. There will be amalgamations, and he pointed his finger and he said, and it is going to affect you. So that didn't leave a real good lasting impression. From that day forward, our members were filled with anger and fear of the process, and as a result, there were many unanswered questions, the main one thing being, so what are we going to gain by amalgamating? To date, that question has never been answered to us. We've been told by some of the ministers that there would be cost savings, that there's too many municipal officials that are acclaimed, and that does not provide good governance for our residents because they deserve better representation by having a choice when electing their council members. One minister actually told us that there's just too many of you to deal with, And actually, that's the most honest answer we've received to date. So in the following months, there was another very controversial message from the minister appeared in the Winnipeg Free Press. There were 3 summer resort communities that had been asked to be exempt because they felt they were unique and they had a healthy tax base of seasonal cottagers. Most of their seasonal populations were up at least 5,000 residents. You're going to love this. The minister's reply was, and he's very firm about this again, there are no exemptions. There are none, zero, nada, squat, nothing. And there is no magic wand either. He said holdout municipalities should stop behaving like insolent children, and instead of fighting it, small municipalities should talk about the benefits, such as reducing administrative costs of running a municipality. He added, where people had dug their heels in and weren't going to talk to anyone, hell would freeze over before they understand we're serious. Well, that didn't make him the most popular minister, of course. He already wasn't. Within a few months later, he had been replaced. And we talked about, or someone talked about change of tone brings forward change of attitudes, and that sure would have gotten a long ways here. And it's interesting, those resort communities were exempt very shortly after they had a public rally, because most of them are from the city of Winnipeg, an NDP stronghold. There's no other decisions here. So what was the criteria? And we heard today too about getting the size right. The 1,000 population threshold was the only criteria provided for the forced amalgamation of our municipalities. Consequently, this affected 87 out of 196 municipalities. Our association attended many meetings in the next months with the Premier and the Minister of Local Government, urging them, please reconsider the criteria. A letter was sent from our association to the Minister in March of 2013, and I'm going to read you word for word kind of how it read. It said, during the district meetings, we heard many similar concerns regarding amalgamation. Unreasonable timelines, artificial number of 1,000 citizens used to determine communities that must amalgamate, the lack of reasons why the government's proceeding with the plan, elimination of input through the municipal board, cost implications such as policing for those who amalgamate, and many other concerns. Municipal leaders who receive low remuneration as compared to their federal and provincial counterparts contribute countless hours to serve their communities. Many of them are not interested in becoming elected officials who will end up costing their citizens more money while covering larger areas. Forced amalgamation is tearing communities apart who have built partnerships over the past decades. Some members have consulted with their electorate who oppose amalgamation. Neither our members nor the provincial government ran in the last election on the promise to amalgamate municipalities. So let's focus on what we have been elected to do. Let's deal with the crumbling infrastructure, the lack of housing, and find an alternative source of revenues. The top-down, one-size-fits-all, province-wide approach shows disrespect by the province and has been described as bullying by more than one member at recent meetings, and it got pretty hostile at some of our meetings. It went on to say, based on our meetings with our members, we propose to you the following steps to consider. Number 1, assess the viability and the sustainability of communities at the current funding levels by enhancing the tools for change document that was jointly developed by the AMM and the Manitoba local government. Number 2, eliminate the 1,000 threshold requirement. Provide all the support necessary to those who are ready to amalgamate before the next municipal election. Monitor their success and highlight to the rest of the communities, thus encourage them to follow suit. Number 3, work with the rest of Manitoba municipalities that are struggling to be sustainable on acceptable timelines that will result in better services for their communities. It concluded by saying, you made it clear to municipal leaders that you will be introducing legislation this spring. We are hopeful the provincial government will consider our proposal and the comments of our members and will not be remembered as the government that destroyed the good relationship with just the stroke of a pen. So there was a bit on legislation. I've had to cut out. It's so hard to put the past 2 years into 20 minutes. It's just, I had to really struggle with this. So I'm going to go on with the amalgamation plan. On October 31st, 2013, several of our municipalities received an email from the minister indicating that they were to begin the process of amalgamation if they had not already started. And it was a document, and that amalgamation plan outlined telling you who your new partners were going to be. Some of them included up to 6 municipalities, whether you would be considered urban or rural. It gave you the new name of your new municipality. It was a number, not a name. It was almost like a jail type thing, you know. It identified the location of your municipal office. It told you what your civic and mailing address and the legal description of your municipality would be. It outlined the total number of council members you'd have and how they would be elected at larger wards, the number of wards, and whether transitional measures would be used for the taxation. The CAO was to be named, and they were to indicate whose bylaws and resolutions would be applied. The senior election official for 2014 had to be named, which municipalities' campaign expense and contribution bylaw would apply to the election, when the first council meeting would be held, and also about the public consultation process. Well, needless to say, a process that wasn't going really well just got a whole lot worse. To have these really important decisions about amalgamation of our municipalities dictated by the Minister of Municipal Government without consulting our councils created an even more hostile attitude. Municipalities were given the opportunity to redo these plans, and they had 60 days to do it. They had to be in by December 31st. This action by the government resulted in a late resolution coming to our annual convention, which was just 1 month later, that asked our association to take legal action against the government. The resolution passed by 65%, and a lawsuit was launched immediately. And I'm just going to say we lost the lawsuit, and it was based on this plan dictating to the municipalities. It was a good effort, but it did not pass, needless to say. I'm just going to give you a bit of an outline what our association did on behalf of our municipalities. We sent 14 member advisories and provided updates through our weekly bulletins. Our president made a presentation at the legislature on the bill to the committee. We attended numerous meetings with the minister, his staff, and the premier, and wrote many, many letters over the course of the year. We held a meeting for affected members in October 2013 with our legal counsel. We contributed articles to the Free Press. We filed the legal application, as I indicated. We worked really closely with the Manitoba Municipal Administrators Association and the province on a committee to establish and develop supports for amalgamating municipalities. We developed a checklist of issues, and the province agreed to provide financial support to resolve the issues for these affected municipalities. We also worked with municipal government to address the issues with having both old and new councils active between October election, October 22nd, and January 1st, 2015, when the new councils will take effect. So for 2 months, we have all the old councils, but we also have a new council, so it's very, very confusing. So the new municipal landscape for Manitoba, we will now have 137 municipalities, down from 197, so 60 municipalities have been eliminated. Some amalgamations will include 2 municipalities, and some will merge 3 together. The 3 resort municipalities I indicated, they did not have to, they were exempt. Their populations actually range from 374 people to 696. Now this is the real kicker, and you wonder why we get a little frustrated. You had to have that 1,000 population, that's the law. However, there were 10 municipalities that amalgamated to 5. They've been allowed to remain under the 1,000. They amalgamated, but that's okay, they don't have to be 1,000. And they range anywhere from 629 to 971. So where's the equity here? Not sure. There's municipalities that are over the 1,000 that are struggling, and they may have benefited by amalgamating. And some municipalities with populations over 1,000 were actually forced to take on their smaller neighbors, and that didn't make them real happy either. So consequently, there's some really bad feelings between municipalities. I'm just going to talk a bit about the transition committee. That's what they're going to call the newly elected after October 22nd. The new councils are going to be called a transition committee. because they didn't think of this. They didn't know how they were going to deal with it. So this just came up July 15th of this year. So this transition committee regulation was developed by the government, released July 15th, and it states the following. The members of a transition committee are the persons elected to the council of the newly amalgamated municipality at the October 22nd general election. The purpose of the transition committee is to make plans and preparations that the members consider necessary respecting their assuming the role of council for the newly amalgamated municipality on January 1st, 2015. So none of these amalgamations actually take effect until January. It states that they can give consideration to the organizational structure, council committees and other bodies of council, and governing procedures, etc. They cannot implement these decisions as resolutions until they're sworn in office after January 1st. Needless to say, there's not a lot of business going on in our municipalities at this point of the municipalities that are amalgamating, because we basically we don't have any power to do anything prior to the election now. So we're going to be well into the new year. There's no budgeting, there's no nothing going on. We're kind of at a standstill, which is pretty frustrating. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of insight what it's like to be working on behalf of the municipalities as the vice president, but also looking after my community as the mayor throughout this whole thing. So as mayor of my municipality and the urban vice president, the past 2 years has been, I will just say, extremely stressful. I had to act in the best interest and the expectations of my town, but I had to remain respectful at our association government meetings. From the day of the announcement, I had all the up-to-date information regarding the amalgamation of our municipalities, which in fact was helpful so I could communicate to my council. We knew anything that was going on. We had it firsthand, so that was good. The most important advice during the year was from our legal counsel, our municipal legal counsel, and he advised our association that the legislation was solid. Of course, it's written by lawyers, so they know what they're doing. There were no loopholes, and the only course of action for municipalities would be to prove their census numbers. My colleagues on the AMM executive and staff were always supportive throughout the process in meetings with the local government. I was often given the opportunity to speak on behalf of our amalgamating municipalities and present the human side of this and the negative effects of their decision. That was not always easy. I did not cry, but I could have. It was pretty frustrating sometimes because there was things that they just did not get. This sometimes seemed somewhat sympathetic to our concerns, but there was never any consideration or changes made based on our presentations. They did not ever change their course of plan. So I'm going to provide you now my personal experience with my town. Our town's 134 years old, so we have a lot of residents that are pretty bound to the community. When I was elected as mayor of the town of Gladstone in 2006, our community was suffering from a declining population, loss of businesses and services, low assessment, which deterred residential and commercial growth, curtailed health services, and residents in the community had completely lost faith in the future of their community. Gladstone had been a thriving commercial hub for an agriculture-based economy in early years. I operated a business in our town for 33 years, up until 2005, and it was a vibrant and welcoming community. Unfortunately, like many small prairie towns, we were in an economic downward spiral, and there appeared to be no hope of recovery. When elected in 2006, our new council recognized that survival meant rebuilding our population. It was the only way to increase the tax base that would keep us sustainable. For various reasons, and I'd love to tell you that's a whole other story, we were able to achieve our goals in less than 3 years. It was an election goal of one of our council members to get our population back up to the past 1,000 number within our first term in the 2011 census. Back in 2006, when we took over, it was 804. At the time, I thought he was kind of nuts, but I didn't tell him that. But, you know, 1,000 is always, it's funny that this number 1,000 is floating around because that's kind of always where we've been. So, needless to say, we were anxiously waiting for the numbers to be announced because we knew that we had reached our goal of 1,000. To say we were disappointed to find out the census indicated that we were at 879 was an understatement. I called the chief statistician for Manitoba and I asked about the process for the census. I was told that only 52% of our residents had returned their census forms, and I was even more upset when they told me that that was 1% higher than our provincial average. As a result, I spent this, after listening to our legal counsel and all this information, I spent last summer doing a physical census of our community. I actually bought a golf cart, and I don't golf, and our town's not that big, but anyways, it got to be kind of a joke, me riding around in our golf cart doing this census. But I did it, and we did it in such a fashion that it would determine what our population for 2011 and 2012 was as well. Of course, we weren't surprised to find out that during those years we had always been above the 1,000 threshold that the province was basing amalgamations on. We also had the stats from Manitoba Health, which confirmed our numbers were 100% accurate. At one point, early 2013, the Deputy Minister asked to meet with me to discuss our concerns. The government had completed a physical assessment of our town, which clearly indicated we were not a self-sustaining municipality. I think that they felt that that would shut us up and make us go away. Not so. The data that they had used dated back to 2006 and earlier, and consequently was totally inaccurate. When I presented the actual facts, she was actually quite amazed at what had transpired and the future plans that we had in place to move our town forward and to continue to grow. I was confident after that meeting they would realize what a solid case we had to be exempt from amalgamation. Following that, we had meetings with the Premier and the Minister of Municipal Government and staff outlining the dramatic growth and development that was ongoing in our community. We presented the results of our physical census and the dramatic differences between the operations of an urban and a rural municipality. We expressed our concerns about the attitudes of council members and the residents that were very much against amalgamations and asked that we be exempt, based solely on that census figure. Our council knew without a doubt that amalgamating would interrupt the continued growth and development of our town. At one point, the Premier actually said to me that I could name any municipality in the province that we would like to join with, and he looked me square in the eye and said that he would approve it. Well, this made absolutely no sense because amalgamating partners by legislation had to share a contiguous border. And I definitely refused his offer because what would be good amalgamating with somebody miles down the road. This is the same Premier that presented me a Queen's Jubilee Medal in July, walked up to me after the event and said, "Eileen, you have nothing to worry about. It's going to be okay. Don't stress yourself. You are fine. No problems." Right. The town of Gladstone received notice 5 weeks after all the other municipalities had, indicating that we were being forced to amalgamate with 2 other municipalities. The minister asked to meet with me just prior to receiving this notice and expressed to me that Gladstone, because of all the publicity in the media about our efforts to prove the census numbers, we had become a problem for his office. Regardless of the fact that we had proved our numbers as well as our viability and continued growth and development, that he would not be exempting us from amalgamation. Many other municipalities were stalling and pushing back, waiting for this Gladstone decision. We had become the focus. It was obvious that if we were exempt, many others would become aggressive in their attempts to also be exempt. We had become the government's example to show all municipalities their unforgiving and unwavering power. It was actually often joked about that I would likely end up in jail for going against the government. This is always a big joke. But as we all know, in the end, they hold the power. So that's it. It was over. We were done. It was extremely hard breaking this news to my council and staff. They were so convinced that they would be respected for our efforts and our information would be accepted, resulting in an exemption. It was really hard to watch grown men sit with their heads hanging down, wiping away the tears. These same council members had worked so hard for 7 years, well beyond the expectations of a municipal council, to rebuild a broken community. We had succeeded so far beyond anyone's expectation. Even the governments, they applauded us. They just kept giving us grants and everything because we were doing well. And now these councillors just felt like everything was being taken away from them. That's a day in my life I will never forget. It was almost impossible to be strong and reassuring for them when I was also feeling totally devastated. I adjusted my attitude after a few days of angers and a few tears. I was then ready to move forward, to start from square one again, just as we had in 2006. We did it once, and I decided we would do it again. 3 of our 4 councillors are actually running in the upcoming election. Now you have to understand that Gladstone's 1 square mile, we're talking about your populations and such today, but our new municipality is going to be 900 square miles. We are actually one of the biggest geographical municipalities. It includes 6 Hutterite colonies and 1 Amish community, so we're very diverse. Anyways, moving on, within days of our amalgamation plan being sent to the government, the Minister of Finance was in the headlines indicating that there was a serious discrepancy in the 2011 census. She was very upset because at least 18,000 people had not been counted in our province. No kidding. Anyways, we knew it was wrong the day it was released, and it took our government over a year to acknowledge this was a huge problem, and it was going to have a negative impact on the province's treasury due to reduced federal transfer payments. No kidding. I absolutely couldn't believe the irony of this announcement and their amalgamation census based on that same census. You have to realize this was all happening between December 1st and December 24th. We dealt with all of this in a 3-week period right before Christmas. Merry Christmas, I'll tell you. It was a tough one. Within 2 weeks, we were meeting with our 2 named amalgamating partners to decide the future of our municipalities. We're an urban municipality with 5 council members. The other 2 are rural with a total of 12 council members. Understandably, any decisions made were swayed by the rural vote. Decisions made that we felt were to our benefit included the municipal office would remain in Gladstone, being the urban centre. The town would be considered 1 ward of the 3 determined, and we would be using our organizational procedural bylaws. When we started talking about the bylaws, most of the rural guys just had this blank look. They didn't even know what we were talking about. And our campaign and expense contribution bylaws that we used for the upcoming election, theirs was $100, ours is $6,000, and they thought that was a joke because they don't spend anything on election campaigns. So that they thought was pretty funny. We've had little discussion since formulating the required plan, but the good working relationship we've had in the past has definitely been severed. Their public works employees formed a union immediately when their job classifications, when they found out that they would change. And since that time, the respectable working relationship between their management and employees has deteriorated quite badly. There's also a strained relationship between the public works and their councils because of amalgamation concerns. Our public works supervisor, after being employed with the town for 18 years, resigned immediately when he was told he would not be the supervisor or even the assistant supervisor in the new municipality. We have lost a ton of staff, as have other municipalities. Our CAO was also not named for the CAO for the new municipality, nor was one of the other ones. They instead named an administrative assistant who has not been operating in a CAO capacity. The level of stress for our employees working for the past 2 years, not knowing their future, has been the cause of a lot of stress. I've spent countless hours trying to console and encourage them when I'm often near the breaking point myself because I'm constantly receiving phone calls from all the other municipalities, looking for guidance. Within my AMM position, I've also had to remain strong and focused so I can be a role model for other councillors and staff in amalgamating municipalities. October 22nd this year, our worlds are going to change forever. But if I'm elected, I'm ready for that challenge that lies ahead. There will be a lot of frustration, but it's an opportunity to reshape our province and show the government we do have the ability to lead with respect and dignity. I know that not all councillors will have the same optimism as I do, as any change is very difficult for many. I just got to add something in. When you one of the presenters talked about having a cemetery all of a sudden and not knowing what to do with it. I think I counted up at least 15 cemeteries in our new amalgamated municipality, but no problem. My husband's been the funeral director in that area for 45 years. We've got that one aced. We're going to be fine. I'm sure we'll have other problems, but we're good on the cemetery side. Anyways, I'm just going to outline what we kind of see as a bit of the lack of process by the government and some of the consequences. Residents in most municipalities are not in favor of amalgamations. Our province has seen this process in previous years with our school divisions, healthcare, financial institutions, and businesses. In most cases, there are winners and there's losers, which is leaving communities, friends, and even families divided. So amalgamations, we feel, could have been successful if the government had worked with our association towards a structured, timely process with implementation by the 2018 election. We're really concerned about the next census 2016, that it is mandatory, and we certainly will be pressing our MPs towards doing something about this. There's concerns that many positions will be difficult to fill in our councils in the upcoming election. There's going to be such an increased workload with fewer councillors, and we have very large areas to cover. Some prospective candidates, as well as past council members, some long-term, they're disgruntled by forced amalgamations, and they don't want to deal with the extra work of remolding their new jurisdictions. Most planning districts will be dissolved as of December 31st, as they require a minimum of 2 partners to exist. The government indicated earlier that this would not happen, but they've already cut them. Redoing a development plan is very costly, and at this point, we have been told we will not be compensated 1 cent for anything that amalgamation is costing us, and I don't think that's going to change. Our association's introducing bylaw changes at our annual meeting in November for our members to vote on. They address the designation of rural and urban board and executive members. Our association is combined. We only have one association, but we are going to take away, hopefully, the urban and rural designations. With the loss of 60 member municipalities, we are also looking at other changes to our board as well as our operations for next year. Just an example, we're going to lose about $135,000 just in membership fees alone. Currently, all rural municipalities and urban municipalities under 750 people do not pay policing costs. This is part of our Municipal Act, but once we amalgamate urban with rural, we are designated to be a rural municipality. This would indicate that we should no longer be paying policing costs, but that's not going to be the case. This decision is causing a lot of discussion within the Justice Department, and this is yet another consequence that was not considered prior to announcing the amalgamation. So, looking down the municipal road, I think an article in our Municipal magazine written by Brian Kelsey, he writes a lot for a lot of the national newspapers, I think really states something that we really need to focus on for our municipalities within Manitoba, and it's a lot of what I've heard here today too. And it says, local leaders must wake up to the natural state of, in this case, Manitoba politics. The practical concerns of local leaders are simply too far out of reach for the comfy chairs in the legislature. Local leaders must compensate by outflanking provincial officials on at least 2 fronts: transparency and local cooperation. And I mean, we have heard a lot of that today as well. When it comes to transparency, local leaders need to become national leaders in tracking, publishing, collating, digesting, and distributing information on local operations and efficiencies. If there's a spare moment in a CAO's day, make it about data entry, smartphone apps, or website updates. Seriously, this is what needs to be done. This isn't just to prove that local government is more accessible. It's also about getting ahead of the next provincial attack on local government integrity. AMM meetings need to be as much about pooling and promoting unchallengeable truths about local government as they are about lobbying and building relationships. Better data will also help municipal leaders think, act, and train and cooperate as a herd, reducing local government dependence on the provincial predator. My last note, if elected as head of council in the newly amalgamated municipality of Westlake Gladstone in our October municipal election, and then I face another election if I clear that hurdle as the AMM vice president in November, it is my intention to provide strong support and leadership to amalgamated and all other municipalities. I know without a doubt that there's going to be a lot of challenges and a lot of frustrations as we establish new boundaries and learn to work together, but I really honestly do believe this can be done. So I wish you all really a lot of good luck as you move forward in your amalgamation discussions, and I do applaud you for having an event like this, but don't follow Manitoba's lead. I just found an interesting thing too. It was on Facebook, of course. But it's such a good municipal thing. The road to success is paved with potholes, floods, speed bumps, and cracks of failures. If you're experiencing any of these right now, you're on the right road. And just as final, I had some Gladstone pins. They're going to become a collector's item, so I just left them on the back table if anybody wants one. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to be here today.
This is a subject about which I would much rather be speaking to you informally, but I prepared my notes, and I'm going to try to be more or less faithful to the notes, because if I'm not faithful to the notes, this is something I feel passionate about, and I could go on for hours about it. You wouldn't want that to happen. I want to begin by saying that one of the very first political recollections I have was of the amalgamation of the town of Jasper Place and the town of Beverly with the city of Edmonton in 1962, when I was 16 years old. And I have maintained an interest in local community and local government ever since that time. I come with what may be an unusual perspective. As was said in the introduction, I spent 15 years in the Legislative Assembly. I worked for Peter Lougheed while he was Leader of the Opposition before we formed the government in 1971. I spent 7 years as Minister of Education at what I think was a wonderful time to be involved in provincial politics. And then I spent 20 years as Executive Director of the Public School Boards Association of Alberta. And in 1994, we went through the regionalization of school boards, which was very much just like that. And I'm not going to say anything more about the 1994 amalgamation unless you ask questions about it afterwards. I'd like to begin by asking how many of you would feel comfortable sitting on a platform or in a bar with an MLA and being the advocate in front of any kind of audience, large or small, that local community and government is the most important form of government that we have. That is to say, more important than provincial government or federal government. How many of you would feel comfortable making that argument? Thank you very much. And my thanks as well to those of you who didn't put up your hand out of an honest concern about whether or not you could make that case. But what I want to do this afternoon is talk to you about that. Let me start by asking, what happens if you and the AUMA are not proactive? The agenda is currently being driven by provincial government perspectives, aspirations, and priorities. And this has been happening for more than 50 years. With the passage of time, the apparent preeminence of the provincial government story about local government becomes more and more marked as the provincial government becomes more and more self-confident and assertive. I mean, you can certainly say that the government of Manitoba has been assertive in the situation that Eileen just described. There are three things wrong, in my view, with the picture that the provincial government carries in its mind as it maintains its relationship with local government. The first is that the province's citizens are also your citizens. If politicians, municipal councillors, and MLAs are servant leaders, then both municipal councillors and MLAs are servants of the same masters, Alberta's citizens. And it should be the masters, not one of the servants, who decides how the work and resources are allocated among the servants. One of the servants, in this case the provincial government, should not, at least not in my view, be able unilaterally and egregiously to reassign work and resources from one place to another, especially when one of the servants presumes that other servants report to him rather than to the master, that is, the citizens. Remember what Minister of Education Jeff Johnson said at the end of June when he told school boards that they had to report to him certain cases about employment situations. And in the tension of the moment, he said, school boards had better remember that they are accountable to me, which corresponds, of course, to the reality that the Minister of Municipal Affairs can remove municipal councillors, the citizens cannot. The Minister of Education can remove a school board, the citizens cannot. Okay? We've got a misplaced sense of who it is that should be making the first most important decision, and that is the decision about which of you or the provincial government is doing what with what kinds of resources. I can remember being at an AUMA meeting in 74 or 75 when Dr. Hugh Horner, who was Deputy Premier and an icon of provincial politics at that time, made the terrible mistake of referring to local government as a child of the province. Okay? And there was hell to pay in all the media and in caucus, and that's the only time that I can remember Premier Lougheed chastising Hugh in a caucus meeting, excuse me, for his failure of communication. The second thing that is wrong with this picture of the preeminence of the provincial government is that it's based on a bad myth. We hear it said, as Hugh said in that day, that local government is the child or the creature of the provincial government. And that's a superficial and very misleading statement. Municipal government is older than provincial governments, and there is not a single provincial government anywhere in Canada that created local government. At the time of Confederation, they simply inherited it because it pre-existed Confederation in 1867 everywhere in the country. Municipal government, in addition, is frequently as mature, thoughtful, and connected with its electorate as is the provincial government. Sometimes it is more so. For a variety of reasons, local government, I would argue to you, is ultimately more important than the provincial government, which is not to say that the provincial government is unimportant. I labored in that vineyard for 29 years, and I believe in the importance of the provincial government. But I could tell you over 3 or 4 glasses of beer why I think local government is, at the end of the day, more important to our well-being as a democratic civil society than is the provincial or the federal government. I'm a community conservative. I favor finely grained politics. Politics that is, relatively speaking, less mechanistic, less siloed, and more organic, more whole. And we've had people talking about the significance of that organic and whole approach to politics, to local politics, all day long. The party system of politics, which is the operating system in provincial legislatures across the land, is very dysfunctional. That's not peculiar to Alberta, it's happening everywhere. and it's operating to save itself as a system more than it is to serve the people of the province. And it seems to me we're going to experience continued dysfunction in our provincial governments for another 20 or 30 years because they've got to figure it out. That dysfunction, in my view, provides great opportunity for local governments and locally elected politicians to take the initiative. Okay? Comparing MLAs to the number of local government people who are elected across the province, you have 8 times as many boots on the ground as does the government. Okay? And your boots are on the ground in the local community daily, whereas a lot of the government's boots are not in the constituency the MLA represents, they're in Edmonton. If there is a political campaign to be fought, provided that you have the right strategy, I would suggest to you that you've got much better leverage and much greater opportunity than has the provincial government. The third thing that's wrong with the picture that the provincial government carries around in its head about local government is that it is focused on economy and efficiency without regard for effectiveness. The government's story about local government is wrong on at least 3 counts. And in the face of that, I think that you have a better story, and I really recommend that you adopt a very proactive stance, also a strategic stance. In order to be strategic, I recommend that you attend to at least 3 different elements of this situation. The first, that has been mentioned a number of times today, is that any reconfiguration of boundaries will be a mediocre exercise unless it is founded on a meaningful engagement with citizens to discover what it is they want done or delivered locally, what they aspire to when they think of the best that my community can be, and what fears they have about the other side of annexation or amalgamation or other forms of boundary change. You've got to engage your citizenry, and you have to do it proactively, and you have to do it not only on the basis of what you're currently doing and what resources are currently available to you, but what do your citizens aspire to locally? What resources do you need to make that happen? And how can you assure that you're dealing with citizens as whole people and not just in functional or instrumental silos? The framing laws for local government are not perfect, and citizens do have unsatisfactory experiences with local government. There's also the question of whether the frame is even conceptually appropriate for the 21st century. Amalgamation may simply suggest to citizens exchanging one unsatisfactory government for another that is even bigger and simply more remote from the citizen. Annexation may simply suggest that the citizens will be more lost in an even bigger pond. In my view, for reconfiguration to work as an opportunity of general potential, local government needs to address some of the unhappiness that citizens currently feel, have to anticipate at least some of the challenges of the 21st century, and have to offer feasible alternative remedies. What people want, in my experience, more than economic or efficient government, is what they perceive to be effective government. Annexation or amalgamation are merely rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic unless we reframe our expectations and our role descriptions and our reserve allocations and our responsibilities and our accountability. Citizen engagement, and I say this with a reasonable feeling of confidence, will reveal to you that citizens trust local governments more often than they trust their provincial government. Almost certainly, citizen engagement will confirm a serious mismatch between services expected or delivered and revenue. In other words, I believe that local government, especially when it acts collaboratively, is likely going to be better connected to the electorate in the next 20 or 30 years than is the provincial government, whether we're talking about this province or any other province. So local government should reconsider their service delivery mandate and the corresponding necessary sources of fiscal capacity. The second thing that I would urge you to attend to is that local government should address the need to embed local government in the Constitution, and I say the Constitution of the province, in what I would call a local government charter. In my view, the FCM and its provincial affiliates made a terrible strategic error more than 40 years ago in concentrating on the federal government in their attempts to strengthen the position of local government. I'd like to make a couple of points in this regard. The first is that in addition to the Constitution of Canada, every province has a constitution. Now, I had a conversation with Andrew, and he and I have not yet resolved our differences on this, but we're going to. The important thing in Alberta is, however, that the government of Alberta has already affirmed itself on my side of that question, because the government of Alberta in 1990 passed legislation called the Constitution of Alberta Amendment Act, 1990. You can't pass a Constitution of Alberta Amendment Act unless you believe that Alberta has a constitution. And I would argue that it does, and that what local government in Alberta wants to affirm is the importance of amending the Constitution of Alberta in order to embed local government in that Constitution. And I think that there are ways that you could do that. The interesting thing is that the Constitution of Alberta Amendment Act of 1990, first of all, established a land base for the Métis. Okay? And if you talk about community and place, okay, that says something to local government representatives. It established a land base for the Métis in the province, and it also said that that piece of legislation could not subsequently be amended except upon a successful referendum of the Métis in Alberta. Okay? So it deals with the question of land base, and it embeds it in the Constitution, and it says, once we've done this, okay, we, the provincial government, cannot unilaterally and egregiously change this legislation. We have to have the consent of the people to whom this applies. Now, I had a couple of other examples that I was going to cite to you. I'm going to pass on by saying that as an alternative to something like that, which is strictly provincial legislation, you could do what Newfoundland and Labrador have done, and Quebec, and amend the entry into Confederation legislation by amending federal legislation with the participation of the federal government. Newfoundland and Labrador did that about 20 years ago, and Quebec did it not quite 20 years ago, both with respect to education, but it is open to any province in Canada to go to the federal government and say, we want an amendment to the Alberta Act 1905 or the Saskatchewan Act 1905. And again, without going into detail, I'd really like to commend that to you. The third element that I'd recommend local government attend to as a strategic consideration is ecology, because it is emerging as a really, really important consideration of our citizens. And it, in my view, relates back again to the theme that we've heard a number of times during the day, that community is not simply an agglomeration of people, but it is a collection of people who have a relationship with the land. And that relationship in Wood Buffalo is different than it is in Edmonton, is different than it is in the Cypress Hills. I'd like to close with a story about FDR whistle-stopping across the states in advance of the 1936 presidential campaign. Train stops in Iowa, he gives his barn-burning speech off the caboose, and then he walks the length of the platform at the railway station, where a dowager buttonholes him and goes on at some length about how important it is that he should support a particular new social initiative which would help get America past the Great Depression. And he listened for a few moments and said, "Madam, I agree with you completely. Now you must work to create the public demand that I should do what I want to do, although great forces oppose me." And I would suggest that the responsibility of the AUMA at this time, and your responsibility as councillors, is that you've got to go out and create the demand that the provincial government might perhaps in secret want to do, even though great forces are opposed. People involved in local government, especially locally elected representatives, need to demonstrate more self-esteem and self-confidence that they are living inside a story, the story being that local government is the most important building block for the success of civil democratic society. You need to know your story. You need to be able to repeat it with conviction. The story that all of us are living in right now, shaped by years of provincial government policy, law, and practice, it is a misleading story, and it is not helpful to the well-being of the province. You need to be proactive, because if you're not, the current trajectory set by the provincial government will dominate. You have a great strategic proposition that will resonate with voters who, in addition, might want to chastise the provincial government for its somewhat long-standing disrespect of citizens. Again, think of Manitoba. It's vital to the ultimate success of the strategic proposition that you begin with a thorough appreciation of the situation, in which process you must engage your citizens. As I said, amalgamation or annexation without us getting some of these questions right with our citizens is going to be nothing more than rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. I've spoken for longer than I expected to, and I appreciate your patience. And without any further comment, I'm going to say thank you very much. Thank you as well to Bill, particularly. Oh, and to Bernie.
I'm somewhat curious as to whether you were opposed to the amalgamation in principle or opposed to it because of how it was handled. And my second question is, how about those bombers this year?
Well, we're still hopeful. Disappointed with the process, definitely. I guess personally, there's a little part of me, having been from my community my entire life, and, you know, in business, you know, when I started out in '72, things were good. And I mean, I went through the '80s and the recession and I survived, and, you know, things kind of were going downward. And I only sold my business because with two businesses, my husband and I were like, we were just overworked, and one had to go and I got the short straw. So I mean, I didn't get out because of economic. In fact, my business, I was lucky to sell in a community our size. So, you know, and then from 2006, we started this dramatic increase, just unbelievable. I'm a big dreamer. I didn't dream that far. So slightly disappointed that we were being kind of curtailed, yeah. But being involved in the Municipal Association for the province, the process was just wrong. And we knew it. We knew it would be devastating. And you know what? It's not over. we're going to have this election in October, but you know what? If I'm elected in my community and I'm elected provincially, our work is going to start on January 1st. This has not been easy, but we know we have to go with what's been dealt, but it's the road ahead. It's going to be just as difficult. There's no answers.
Any further questions? No? Eileen, David, thank you kindly for putting a punctuation mark on a very unique day of conference discussions. Thank you kindly.
Thank you to you for coming, and thank you for Alberta Prime Time for lending you to us. We thought that it was really important in a forum like this to have somebody that's regarded as an independent spectator, and not somebody that had maybe the stake of it in it that some of us others would have. So thank you for filling that role for us. I want to thank all of our panelists. I think we can all agree that, yeah, please. I'm sure I speak on behalf of all the attendees here and even the ones that had to catch flights when I say that each one of you has given us a different perspective on how we view our communities, how we view the future of our communities, and hopefully what our role is as leaders in our communities. So I want to say thank you to each and every one of you who've committed your time to travel, in some cases across the country, to be here. It's been very valuable, I think, for all of us. So thank you so much. And, yeah, please, one more round of applause, absolutely. Two last thank yous. I said it at the outset. I want to say it again. Thank you so much to the staff of the City of Grand Prairie and my City Council who supported this initiative and made a commitment to saying, yeah, this is the right thing to do. It's an important conversation to have. I appreciate every one of you being behind this. I think Craig from Cold Lake said it pretty eloquently that his community had been on a journey, and he was appreciative of his administration and his council being behind him on that. I think our community is on a journey. We hope to have a good conversation, and I know that that's been a collective effort. So thank you so much to all the City of Grand Prairie folks for that support. And finally, thank you to all of you for traveling, for being interested, and being committed community leaders. Your dedication to your community is obvious by the fact that you're willing to come and sit in a hot, stuffy room all day. But more than that, that you're thoughtful and you're thinking about the future of your community and how you could make that better and all the potential alternative futures that might lay out there in front of us. So thank you to each and every one of you for being here today and contributing to this conversation. Thank you so much and safe travels home.